Victor Charles performed in the television program Night Gallery, titled A Midnight Visit to the Neighborhood Blood Bank, and it was released on November 17, 1971. He performed with Bob Crane, Joanne Worley, and Victor Charles played in the role of Count Dracula. On November 24, 1971, Victor Charles had signed a contract to co-star with Robert Mitchum in MGM's motion picture Wrath of God, starring with Rita Hayworth. Soon thereafter, Victor Charles performed in a short 28-minute film in the trial of Socrates about the life and death of Socrates and Galileo. There were many protests of various cultural issues facing us in 1971, and my Uncle Victor Charles stepped into the arena to voice his own protest to America. On December 9, 1971, disc jockey Clive Thomas of WFBM AM radio broadcasted my Uncle Victor Charles' controversial poem, Suffer the Children. There were many listeners that were strongly offended when hearing it. The nature of the poem he wrote had to do with the connection between Christmas and gifts of toy pistols and rifles for children, and the violence that went with them both. My step-grandfather, Victor Francis, was assisting Victor Charles at that time, and on December 31st, 1971, he read another one of his controversial poems on the Johnny Carson show that had people scratching their heads of his political opinions, and this is what he wrote and read. The science of acting is highly exacting. An artist cannot avoid pain. He needn't be smart, but he's got to have heart, and it helps if you're slightly insane. The great ones are gone, Ethel, loyal John, and Laurie, the sweet Gothic elf. We've lost Lawton and Wynne, Greenstreet and Flynn, and I don't feel too well myself. But this current desire for scanty attire leaves actors like me in a daze. To be poised and composed with your bottom exposed ain't required in most classical plays. There are movies and plays being offered these days that look, smell, and sound much the same as basketball teams snapping towels in the steam in the locker room after a game. The language is crude, the characters rude, the actions I can't even mention. The emotions are raw as the ones that we saw at the last Democratic convention. So don't bother gaining professional training and don't even bother rehearsing. Be a star overnight and the critics' delight. Just take off your pants and start cursing. At the beginning of 1972, I was living in San Luis Obispo, California. My girlfriend, Christy Lynn Monson, left Colorado and came to live with me. We soon moved up to a ranch in the rolling hills of King City, California, and after a short period of time, we married in San Diego. We didn't stay there long because we traveled across America to visit with her grandparents in Glen Ellen near Chicago, Illinois, and then we left America to live in Toronto, Canada. Those were the fun days, seeing and experiencing the different locations and new cities and states of America, and being a part of a whole young generation forging our country into something much better. Christy was 21 and I was 19, and we were living in a 4-story half house in the heart of Toronto City, and we got around the town on the clean and beautiful young subway. One of the first things we did was watching Gilda Radner and Martin Short performing in the stage production of Godspell, at the Royal Alexandra Theatre, 1972. The theatrical experience of seeing that fabulous production was a bright encouragement to me, and I believe it helped me later on to become an actor. Victor Charles was still performing his one-man shows around America in 1972, and he was at West Virginia Tech on January 27, 1972, performing his Just We Three production. Free of charge was the trick for Victor Charles by booking ladies' clubs and universities who paid him a commission so he could achieve two important necessities of winning the confidence of his audiences and also helping him to survive as an actor. Oftentimes tarnished image when performing in poor quality motion pictures and in buffoonery television programs. There were no more Betty Davises, Joan Crawfords, Frank Sinatras, or Dean Martins to lift his image up to the ceiling, or any Academy nominees, because it was only Victor Charles now, all alone, and keeping him afloat. When we take a moment to stop and question, what kind of career would Victor Charles had in motion pictures and television programs had he not performed in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? And if he hadn't received an Academy Award nominee for Best Supporting Actor? This phenomenon of Victor Charles in 1962 and 1963 was a given gift from above that kept him galvanized within the Hollywood circles for the rest of his entire life. On June 17, 1972, Victor Charles was performing in the movie of the week in television titled Good Night, My Love, starring Richard Bone, Barbara Bain, Michael Dunn, and Victor Charles. And 6 days later, he was in an article written by Lawrence Devine about his performance in the motion picture of Wrath of God. Here are a few words that Victor Charles shared about how he felt of the strong violence in the film, saying, "It's not bad, though at films in Mitchman is crucified. Well, Robert is being crucified, and I'm just not going to sit around in the background with a penknife wound. It is very gory. But our feeling toward the picture was that most of the violence is so outlandish that no one will be too worried by it. There's a scene in which an 8-year-old boy is being shot to death. I'm shocked that they left that in. Paula Pritchett, have you seen her in Playboy this month? Plays a mute. I wouldn't be surprised if she doesn't come off better than anybody." He was asked about the untamed violence within the film, and he said, "The Wilde bunch? Robert calls that one the mild bunch compared to ours. It's not my favorite picture, but I try to talk as honestly as possible about it." On June 4th, 1972, another article was written by Jack Meredith about the motion picture Wrath of God. And here are a few more words that Victor Charles described about the violence in Hollywood, saying, "I hope that some scenes are cut. I'm really frightened by the tendency to violence. Sex doesn't bother me unless it degrades into dirty sex. Most of it is beautiful. I took my young niece to see Romeo and Juliet as a wonderful experience, but I'm afraid the pendulum will swing to the other extreme if we continue with untrammeled violence and sex. We will have regulations forced on us if we don't impose them ourselves, and we'll end up being back in the days of Cromwell with not even our necks showing." Victor Charles was in another article on July 9th, 1972, and he shared a few of his witty thoughts, saying, I loved that Batman part. I suggested eating a jeweled lobster in one segment. The producer even thought about it. Not bad. Semi-precious, though. In Batman, I thought for a bit that Comedia might be coming back. It was great. I was getting paid to do what I was taught never to do. Even in that part, I played an evil person, but I tried to play it humorously. I don't try to play against my image. Sure, I'm typecast. I don't mind being typecast as a fat man because a fat man can be anybody. I could play Hamlet, although you'd have to get a Buick to play Ophelia. I don't mind typecasting as long as I see something in the script that I will have fun doing. Acting is the only work I've ever done. I have to act. Actually, I get paid for doing what I do for nothing. The only thing is that I've never been really satisfied with any of my films. I haven't had as much fun as I would have liked. That doesn't mean I want to direct. Directors never have any fun at all. Ralph Nilsson, director of The Wrath of God, is a good director, although we were too regimented in this film, and I think the violence in this film overshadowed the fun I had making it. I'm about through with violence. I've killed an awful lot of people on TV, and I can't help feeling this sort of thing has an effect on people watching it. Still, my work is to entertain, not to instruct. I wouldn't recommend my new film for your daughter's first communion. Still, I'd recommend it for Robert Mitchum's performance and for your first look at Ken Hutchinson, a young English actor who is astonishingly good. Robert Aldridge is a director who makes you feel as if you were the only one who could possibly do the part. That's nice. George Stevens, for whom I worked in The Greatest Story I've Ever Told, has a refreshing streak of rottenness in me. I was Barak, the Jew, in that film. We were doing a setting shot, the camera on a boat about the lake, hordes of us on the shore. No one would have seen me if I had been holding a grand piano. The camera was turning a voice on the loudspeaker and came out over the water. Mr. Buono, you are mugging too much. Afterward, I sent a note out to the boat. Thank you for correcting me. Will you marry me? When the scene was over and we were all going back to our rooms, the voice came over the water again. Mr. Buono, I can't. Mother told me never to marry a mother. In 1972, my Uncle Victor Charles was letting out his honest opinions after being in Hollywood for 12 years acting in television and motion pictures. His touring one-man shows of poetry and prose throughout America helped him to be more grounded and allowed him to discover who he truly was as a person. Everything began to come together, and clarity of what he had done since 1959 encouraged him to say, acting is the only work I've ever done. I have to act. Actually, I get paid for doing what I do for nothing. The only thing I've never been really satisfied with was my films. I haven't had as much fun as I would have liked. It is a blatant loss of opportunities for Victor Charles not being cast in classical motion pictures where he could perform as kings and popes instead of buffoons like King Tut and Big Daddy. By 1972, he hadn't a role that would bring the depth of his true inner soul of how he really saw the world. With his brilliant mind and exquisite tone of speech that carried audiences to great depths of emotions, he never was given quality productions by Hollywood because they believed they could make more money off of him by his playing their jolly and heavy gesture clowns. I knew him. I lived with him. And I know he was better for what they gave him. Victor Charles performed in the motion picture Northeast of Seoul, filmed somewhere in Asia, and his role was Portman. The executive producer was John von Neumann. There weren't any dates when it was released or if it ever opened in theaters in the United States. This particular motion picture probably fits well when Victor Charles said, "The only thing is that I've never been really satisfied with any of my films." On July 28, 1972, my Auntie Susie, also known as Sylvia Vernice Keller Bittenbrock, died in San Diego, California. She was 69 years old when she left us, and she was the sister of Victor Charles's mother, Myrtle Bell Buono. Auntie Susie was a strong woman and a great cook. As a young man growing up, I always looked forward to seeing her walking around in her kitchen like a queen, and there was never a silent moment in her second-story beachfront house in South Mission Beach. There were never any soft-speaking conversations, but only loud and passionate arguments and laughs. I loved lying on my beach towel on her red-colored bricks in the sand that kept me warm after swimming in the cold ocean saltwater. She was one of the major pillars of the family, and everyone missed her dearly. Oscar Wilde was found guilty and was sentenced for 2 years in London's Pentonville prison. He was released from prison in 1897 after suffering greatly and was in poor health, living only about 3 years longer, and he died on November 25th, 1900, at the age of 45. I'm a playwright, and I have spent over 30 years in theater as an actor and director, and I can clearly envision my uncle Victor Charles playing the role of Oscar Wilde. I can hear his words spoken and his amazing wit bouncing off the walls of the theater, and his gentleness, posture, bringing Oscar Wilde back to life. Hollywood made a horrible mistake by not seeing and allowing what Victor Charles could have done in a motion picture of the life of Oscar Wilde. In 1972, actors in Hollywood still had to hide in dark closets in order to find the love that they wanted within their lives. On December 7, 1972, Victor Charles was performing in the production of The Men Assignment, Vienna, starring his longtime friend Robert Conrad, Rosemary Foers, and John Erickson. And on December 17, 1972, he was performing in the television program The Mod Squad. I believe my Uncle Victor Charles found his voice to speak truthfully from his heart during the past 3 years of 1970 to 1972. He took his message of love of prose and poetry intimately to many others within universities and women's clubs across America. He personally showed his true character to them, instead of letting them think he is a monster or evil man when he played in television programs and motion pictures. I believe he strengthened his confidence as a human being, instead of only being an invisible screenwriter's image of a man. He took things into his own hands and went to the people of America to let them make their own decisions of what kind of man he was. In my opinion, the Academy Award nomination for Whatever Happened to Baby Jane wasn't his greatest achievement, but it was his courage to speak honestly, intimately, eye to eye, with women and men in Montana, Ohio, Michigan, and California, and numerous other locations throughout our country, and him openly showing them who he truly was. My wife, Christy, and I left Toronto, Canada, and returned to King City, California in 1973. It was there that we had our first child, and we named her Kira. After visiting in San Diego for a while, we soon packed our luggage and moved up to British Columbia, Canada, and we were living there in the beautiful city of Vancouver for the next 8 months during 1973. Victor Charles was now living in Apple Valley near Victorville, California, and his father, Victor Francis, might have lived there and with my grandma, Mert, too. The year of 1973 was a big step in the right direction for him, because he was now being cast in more television programs. I believe this good fortune stemmed greatly from his wonderful performance in Henry IV Part 1 at the Mark Taper Forum Music Center in Los Angeles, California in 1972. He was making his own way and not having to depend on his prior achievements of working with Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, Frank Sinatra, and Dean Martin. He now was a bona fide true celebrity of his own making after his last 3 years of reaching out to the public eye to eye and being close enough to be appreciated by his large stature of gentleness and intelligence. On January 21st, 1973, Victor Charles was performing his one-man show, Just We Three, at Montgomery's Women's Club Town Hall in the Kenwood Theater in Cincinnati, Ohio. On January 26, 1973, writer Carol Valentine printed his words saying, "Theater, we need each other. Needed is a story to tell, a teller to tell it, and a listener to hear and evaluate it. Following in love and being in love has an eternal sameness. Puzzled, loving husbands look at their wives with the thought, why, having won her, do I woo? She's not and never can be mine." I love playing Shakespearean roles, although there are some I cannot play. I would love to play Puck, but it would take a mighty big operon. Victor Charles also described his poetry as being organized silliness. And he kept saying the words from his poems. "We are what we eat," said a wise old man. "Lord, give me strength. I'm a garbage can. If the Lord had wanted me to be thin, he would never have given the world pizza. It is more blessed to spread than to recede, and the length and breadth of the world should be served peanut butter and jelly. We should line all thin people up in a row and make them eat cake. Trees, I think that I shall never see my feet. Lord, you love me. Shut my mouth. Once more, Victor Charles was performing his one-man shows, Just We Three, in Indiana on February 1st, 1973, at Marion College, in the Marion Hall Auditorium. For attendance, it was absolutely free for the curious. On February 10th, 1973, in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, writer Kathy Myers preserved the words of Victor Charles's saying, I'm here to entertain. Together we will create some theater. We need each other. To create theater, we need a story that needs tailing, a storyteller and a listener. So, with a willing suspension of disbelief, let us make footprints across the sands of time. And what better place to begin than in the beginning? First lessons are cruel to a child. Parents foresee heartaches, but can do little to forestall them. The optimist says this is the best of all possible worlds. The pessimist answers, I'm afraid you're right. The more spare time we have, the less time we have to spare. I truly believe my Uncle Victor Charles was using self-therapy to heal the pains of his childhood. He orchestrated his one-man shows with topics that were clearly pointing at him and not just at his audiences. His upbringing was surrounded by a mafia culture due to the association his father, Victor Francis, was living during the 1940s and 1950s. Once again, Victor Charles's one-man shows were one of his greatest achievements as an actor, and more importantly, as a human being. My grandfather, John Allen Golden, died on February 13, 1973. He was my mother Hilda's father. I was living in British Columbia, Canada, and unfortunately I didn't attend his funeral. His two daughters, Hilda and Agnes, and his two sons, Lynn and David, stood beside my grandmother, Laura Golden, on that sad day in February. I will always hear his voice calling me, Pocky. He named me with that nickname after having the chicken pox as a child, and he taught me to push a broom around a large room, circling the dirt and into the tiny pile. I would stretch out on the living room carpet in the evening, and I ate ice cream at his feet while he sat in his lounge chair, watching his favorite television western, Gunsmoke. He was a good man, and he loved his family, and I will always have the image of him sitting at the kitchen table reading his newspaper, with my grandmother Laura preparing our morning breakfast, and when I walked in, he would look up and say, Good morning, Pocky. On March 6, 1973, Victor Charles was in the television program Crime Club, starring Lloyd Bridges, and he commented about it saying, I play a retired federal judge who is the founder and confidant of a crime club in Los Angeles. An organization with a name like Crime Club, with me involved, conjures up images of all sorts of evil doings. But the name is misleading. The Crime Club is really an organization of men engaged in solving crime, not causing them. Its members are detectives on all levels, and I'm sort of a father figure. It is refreshing to play a nice guy for a change, but my fans don't have to worry. I'm not quite prepared to make a habit of it just yet. My Uncle Victor Charles, unfortunately, didn't stay long as the good guy in the television motion picture Crime Club because the series was discontinued. It's a shame he couldn't have gone longer to be able to show a more human side of his character and to bring forth a more positive image as an actor. If Crime Club had continued, it may have encouraged other television programs to cast him as their good guy. On April 24th, 1973, Victor Charles was in the television program The Lie, starring Elizabeth Wilson and George Segal. This production was scripted by legendary Ingmar Bergman. On July 28, 1973, Victor Charles was in the television program Great Mysteries in the episode of Money to Burn, and the host of the show was Orson Welles. And one day later, on July 29, 1973, Victor Charles commented in an article saying, "If humor is based on the unexpected, then Nixon has a lot to be funny about. But I can never see him telling a good joke. I am more reluctant to the closing of a bookstore than a movie theater, and more effective if a person wants to be aroused in that they should be governed by the movie industries. Both need to be governed by their creators. London is still the theatrical capital of the world. It has the most plays for the cheapest prices and an atmosphere where no one is showing off new cars or furs, or, for that matter, old cars and old furs." Victor Charles was in the television program The Brian Keith Show, and naturally starring Brian Keith, on November 10th, 1973, and Victor Charles was playing in the role as a building contractor. On November 16, 1973, Victor Charles was in the motion picture Arnold, and he played the role as the minister. The storyline went something like this. In this morbid comedy, the title character is a deceased and quite wealthy man who gets married to his lover, Karen Stella Stevens, so she can inherit his money. My Uncle Victor Charles just couldn't seem to pull away from performing in television programs and motion pictures that kill at least one person or more. He was definitely typecast by Hollywood producers, and once again, it's a crying shame they didn't cast him in classic roles with intelligent dialogues and meaningful storylines. He had recently proven when playing Falstaff in Henry IV Part 1 at the Mark Taper Forum Music Center in Los Angeles at the beginning of 1973, and he was an excellent classic actor and not a buffoon. He was a sensation when speaking the words of William Shakespeare, but Hollywood forced him to speak lesser words of buffoonery and nonsensical whodunits in silly detective plots. He had to make a living, and he had to forfeit his integrity as an actor to put food on his family table. My Uncle Victor Charles continued performing his one-man shows, and he was digging deeply into his belly and heart of memories, and he wanted to challenge the way people perceive others. He was on the offensive in an intelligent manner and educational way to alter the prior decades of American culture. On stage, in television, and in motion picture romances are usually only allowed for those who are handsome and pretty. To be a pretty woman, she must be thinner and not heavier, and have gorgeous hair and eyes. To be a handsome man, he must have muscles and not a fat belly, and have a strong jaw and glistening blue eyes. He never was allowed to sunbathe under the sun on a sandy beach wearing nothing but a skimpy bathing suit, because that was only reserved for thinner men than he. If he saw a young pretty lass across the room and wished to ask her out for a date, that was only for a younger lad, thinner and more handsome than he. Victor Charles must have loved the motion picture Marty in 1955, starring Ernest Borgnine, who won the 1956 Academy Awards Oscar for Best Actor of the Year. Borgnine didn't look like Clark Gable, Gary Cooper, or Cary Grant, but he had wonderful words to say that was written by legendary screenwriter Paddy Chayefsky. It was a modern-day Beauty and the Beast, where true love shines deeper than the shape of one's body. It also won the Best Picture of the Year in 1956, and on the very same year, Victor Charles won his first Globe Atlas Award for Best Actor of the Year, playing in Villepone at the Old Globe Theater in San Diego, California. On November 25, 1973, Victor Charles was in the television program Mannix in the episode of Search in the Dark. And 3 days later, on November 28, 1973, he was performing in his one-man show, This Would I Keep, in Zanesville, Ohio. Then Victor Charles performed in the television program The Odd Couple, titled The Exorcists, playing in the role of Dr. Clove. It was released on December 7, 1973, and the executive producer was Gary Marshall. And on December 8, 1973, he was performing in the television program of Hawaii Five-0. When being interviewed in this television program and asked about his early years when he played in the role of Sir John Falstaff in Henry IV, Part 1 at the Old Globe Theater, he commented, I suppose it was the foolishness of my youth at that time and told me I had to do it. It takes years of study and reading and watching and listening to do justice to Sir John Falstaff. Only a bumpkin would have tried to do it with my lack of experience at that time in my career. Then he was asked about his role in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and when working intimately with Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, saying, playing opposite these two remarkable stars, I felt like an altar boy invited to the council in an adversary capacity. Bette Davis told me on a set on another movie we were doing together, and I was one of the few actors who have ever upstaged her. When questioned about his one-man shows he performed throughout America, he said, I go out to the campuses every year with a program of poetry readings, although I like to include something by James Boswell, an 18th century Scotsman, and Dr. Samuel Johnson. My program consists mainly of readings from 19th and 20th century American poets, Emily Dickinson, Dorothy Parker, and James Thurber. One of the most enjoyable things about this is that I invariably get to have some sessions with the students themselves. They are full of questions about everything, the theater, the English language, life, everything. Finally, being asked about his international trips to perform in foreign motion pictures, he simply said, it's a good living and a good life. On December 19, 1973, Victor Charles was in the 90-minute television series of the Snoop Sisters, and it was the second episode of Corpse and Robbers, starring Helen Hayes and Mildred Natwick. And its first episode was The Female Instinct, aired on December 18, 1972. Corpse and Robbers aired on December 19, 1973. Victor Charles played the role of Nathan, and this was his only performance in the Snoop Sister programs. This was one of the most productive years for Victor Charles's acting career by proving he was more than just a villain or buffoon in television programs and motion pictures. What he achieved most in 1973 was playing Sir John Falstaff in William Shakespeare's Henry IV, Part 1, at the Mark Taper Forum Auditorium. Hollywood finally took notice that the 6'3" and 350 pounds actor was one of the greatest actors to ever play Sir John Falstaff on a theater stage. He won respect all alone by speaking the words of William Shakespeare and the poetry of W.B. Yeats and Dylan Thomas. It took him 13 years from 1960 to 1973 to be recognized that he was his own man. His prose and poetry and honesty in sharing how people of enormous weight still need love, self-esteem, and confidence to sit with others without feeling lesser because of it. When he was young, his peers laughed at his size, but as he grew, Victor Charles turned the table in his favor with amusement to make others laugh. He was weakened as a child, but when he was older, his strength came from seeing people laughing. When 1974 rolled around, my wife Christy and I returned to San Diego, California. We had a 2-bedroom apartment on Utah Street in North Park. We were in walking distance to Balboa Park, the San Diego Zoo, and the Oak Grove Theater. This was the year I began inching my way into performing arts. I began acting in street theater at Balboa Park in front of visitors from other states and foreign countries. There was music in the air with musicians and jugglers performing everywhere throughout the park. When I wasn't acting in a street theater skit, I would put on white theater paint on my face and attempted to perform like the legendary mime Marcel Marceau in Balboa Park. I soon stumbled over the Indian magic in the Zorro Gardens at Balboa Park, and I was amazed by what I heard and saw of this marvelous street actors company. When I sat in amazement watching the hilarious actors of Indian magic performing in Zorro Gardens, I was completely overtaken with joy. I soon introduced myself to the members of Indian Magic, and I was invited to Sam Woodhouse's apartment in the Golden Hills of downtown San Diego to talk about theater and about our lives. Soon thereafter, Indian Magic rented an old factory building in the slum district of downtown San Diego, and they produced wonderful parties on the upper floors with live band music and performing screaming, hilarious comedy skits. Soon, in my excitement, I started exercising my amateur skills as a playwright, and offered a few of my new sketch scripts to them. Unknowingly, at that point in time, I didn't know that I would soon be leaving San Diego in 1975 to Albuquerque, New Mexico, to start working at my new job. That was a painful day when leaving the creative opportunities of working with Indian magic. On January 3rd, 1974, Victor Charles was performing in his one-man show, Just We Three, at Ventura College in Van Nuys, California. We might have found it difficult to keep booking his one-man show to the same colleges and lady clubs. He may have become weary of flying from state to state and performing his same old material, bogging him down and making him bored. Whatever the reason was, his newspaper clippings were having a serious drought. In May of 1974, Victor Charles was in the motion picture The Mad Butcher, and he played the role of Otto Lehmann. It was filmed in Italy, and it was finally released in the United States. The description of the film goes like this. After being released from a mental hospital, Otto returns to his old job as a butcher. He tries to adjust to his new life, but after a bitter argument with his wife, he accidentally kills her. Fearing he will be sent back to the hospital, he grinds her body and sells it as sausages. As friends and relatives start asking questions about her disappearance, they too start ending up in the butcher's display case. Here, Victor Charles goes again, performing in another motion picture that only tainted his image all the more by killing women and his wife. Between reciting prose and poetry in his one-man shows and murdering others on the silver screen, it was a constant contradiction that struggled within him to find out who the real Victor Charles Buono truly was. Victor Charles once again was performing in the role of Sir John Falstaff, but this time it was at the Old Globe Theatre on July 15, 1974. The local newspaper reviews weren't as wonderful as they were before at the Mark Taper Forum Auditorium in Los Angeles, when his accolades were showering over him like a crowned king of actors. This particular performance as Sir John Falstaff at the Old Globe Theatre was his last time to speak William Shakespeare's rich and lasting words on their stage. He would never again be in another Shakespearean play in the theater that made him a professional actor in television and motion pictures. It was in the summer of 1974, a short while before Victor Charles would be acting as Falstaff in Henry IV at the Old Globe Theatre. He was in the late stages of rehearsal, and I contacted my Uncle Victor Charles if I could come over and visit with him. After arriving, we walked into the costume department to see legendary Peggy Kellner. They had a warm and amusing chat while I stood drinking in their intimate friendship. It was clear to me that they both highly respected one another. To this very day, I still see them as two giants of theater, and having had that privilege of sharing their special moment together. Victor Charles and I sat outside at a colorful umbrella table in two comfortable chairs outside the theater stage door. We talked about the motion pictures and television programs he recently performed in and how my grandma Mert and my step-grandfather Victor Francis were doing in Apple Valley. Soon we stretched our legs and took a walk across the street from the Old Globe Theater into Balboa Park Garden, where a water fountain was surrounded by flowers, and as we walked I asked him, "How do you find the character to play Falstaff?" There was a pause, and as we slowly walked through the garden, he then softly spoke, saying, "Falstaff talks to me and whispers into my ears." I didn't question him, because I knew he believed it was true. Later in life, when I became an actor, I would think back on that special day, and before stepping out onto the stage, I knew I had to believe my character was true. We returned to the Old Globe Theater and entered into the belly of its dressing rooms. As we walked down the aisle, I saw many actors putting on their costumes and makeup, talking and laughing together. This was my very first experience of what was like being in the company of professional actors. I was inspired and completely taken by the drumming energies all around me on that day. Finally, we entered his dressing room and we were all alone. I stood directly behind him as he applied makeup on his face, and I focused on his eyes from the mirror's reflection. I can't recall what I made asking my Uncle Victor Charles, "Have you ever thought about acting in a street theater play?" There was a pause, and he soon looked up at me, smiling with his blue eyes, saying, well, why no? Why no? But I'll give it some thought." I went on describing about the theater group Indian Magic and of their hilarious plays they performed in the Zorro Gardens in Balboa Park. He politely sat there, applying makeup on his face and hands and listening to my innocent and terribly lacking experience. I only knew he had been in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, Ford for Texas, Robin and the Seven Hoods, The Silencers, The Wrath of God, and King Tut in Batman. In thinking back on that day, I was completely ignorant of his sterling acting career as an actor while standing behind him looking in his Sir John Falstaff eyes. He said to me, "Even though I'm a professional actor making thousands of dollars, I would gladly act for only catching coins tossed to me by inspired audiences on a dirty roadside." Theater was his life, his passion, and he was a true actor that would go anywhere and any play, television program and motion picture, just to feel the energy when standing before a camera and standing on stage. Finally, his makeup was on his Falstaff face and his stout body costume fitting just right. He walked me into the audience sitting area and sat me centered just right to see him and everyone perfectly. The lights went black, and then there were numerous voices in the dark as the stage lights rose slowly, bringing everything into sight. Victor Charles, my uncle the actor, stood center stage as the other actors danced around him like a human maypole, prancing and up and down while his Falstaff voice was streaming amusing Shakespearean words as I sat there in awe. When the rehearsal came to an end, he washed Falstaff off his face, he got dressed, and he drove me to my home at Utah Street in North Park. When looking back on that precious day, it truly was a privileged moment in my life to have been with one of the greatest Shakespearean actors to ever play Sir John Falstaff. My father Sonny lost his cousin Carl Brittenbach on September 7th, 1974. I called him Uncle Carl my whole life. They both lived in South Mission Beach, and it took only 2 minutes to reach each other's house. Carl was cooking breakfast in the kitchen for his girlfriend Tess, and he suddenly had a heart attack. He immediately fell to the floor, and Tess ran to the stairs and into the alley, running to get my father Sonny. When they returned, apparently, Carl was already dead before he hit the kitchen floor. He was only 48 years old when he died that morning. Carl and Tess had made plans to marry after Annie Susie died. My Uncle Carl was a gentle and very good man, and he never said an angry word in front of me. My father never got over it because he was his very best friend. When they were teenagers and sailors on the same U.S. naval ship during World War II fighting in the South Pacific, they had a lasting bond that couldn't ever be broken. Carl always had a pleasant smile on his face, and what hurt most was the long, loving relationship between him and Tess, a love story that was suddenly severed, and she cherished his memories for the rest of her life.